Amen. Friends, we have three things on our agenda today for our pre-convention hearing. First, just a word of thanks from me. I appreciate your time. I know Tuesday morning, bright and early, is you have lots of other things you could be doing with this time, and you've chosen to be with us here. So I am truly grateful. I appreciate your commitment to this conversation, to the convention process, and to our diocese. And it is wonderful to see so many folks from all across our diocese gathered this morning. We have three items of business for the pre-convention hearing. We will, of course, review the proposed budget. We will also review the work of the Commission on Constitution and Canons and any the proposals they have for changes to our diocesan canons. And we will then review the work of the Resolution Committee as well. I think today we will begin this session with a conversation around our budget, and I'm going to turn to our treasurer, Mr. Jonathan Gloucester, and ask him to share in presenting on that.
Thank you, Bishop French. And again, I have to click one more thing to make me host to share, co-host.
My apologies. We will do that. It's part of the charm of Zoom. So I am going to make you a co-host, and you should be able to share beginning immediately.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So this morning I'm going to present the proposed budget for 2025 that was actually presented to Diocesan Council last week. I will give a notice that we're in the process of making some updates based on some information that's occurred over the last week. But the bottom line won't change significantly, maybe a little higher, a little lower. We're just going to reclassify some of the expenses that are in this budget. But first, I'd like to start with our main income line, the March of Mission pledge income. And looking at responses to date from March of Mission asking requests, we got a little over 50, close to 60% congregations have responded yes, and we've seen the trend upward into those that are making a full asking or at least increasing the asking up to 10% or making some increase over what it was last year. Some it's the same, but we've seen a majority of the responses so far to trend upward. So in the committee and reviewing those responses and still awaiting responses from other congregations, has looked at the projected income for March of Mission giving, and we've got it at that 3,016,000, almost 3,017,000 for 2025. Hope the trend continues as we've seen in the actual responses, but we are looking for some increase in March of Mission responses. We've actually seen in 2024 March of Mission payments, we've actually seen some good news in that area so far through the first 3 quarters of the year. So we hope that trend continues into 2025. Other areas of income is the trust income line 2. That's income from dividends and interest on our investments held in the Diocese Investment Trust, that percentage that's designated to go to the operating budget. A little less than last year just because we have fewer shares, mainly because we've sold some shares, but the market value of those shares has increased somewhat over the last year. And line 2A, designated funds, these are funds that through other trust funds and designated funds that a small percentage has been designated to go to the operating account. The line 6, trustee grants, I'm going to leave the detail on that till we come back, but basically that's the amount we project we need to cover any deficits between the income and the first 3 lines and what our final expenditures will be. So with that, I'm going to jump over to expenditures and show you how we arrived at the budget we're proposing at this point. Any questions so far on those quick income line items, first 3 income line items? Okay, in terms of expenditures, in terms of our diocesan priorities, One change from last year is the budget for mission congregations. It's down to 375,000. It was budgeted 475 last year. The actual amount approved by the Board of Missions was 439, but it does show a decrease in our payments to mission congregations in the 2025 budget. The second line item is our payment to the Episcopal Church. Last year we budgeted 300,000, which was a reduction of about half of what the asking was. In reality, when the National Church reviewed our request, they came back and only approved us for $400,000, a reduction of $400,000 in our payment to the Episcopal Church in 2024. And so we will be making a payment of $400,000 in 2024. For 2025, we're budgeting 500,000. We're projecting that the asking will be a little more than 600,000, but we're still going to be asking for a reduction from that this year, coming up in 2025, and we're hoping we can get back to doing the full asking in 2026. On the social and ethnic ministries, went through this process. In some cases, we've kept them the same. In some cases, we've had some decreases in those areas. Just going through real quickly, the Anti-Racism Commission, the request came in a little less than last year. They were 13,150. Hispanic Commission, we kept that the same. One area of change is in global development goals. This is a fund to provide matching grants to congregations who make contributions to global initiatives. We reduced that budget from 15,000 to 10,000 in 2025. Even though it's an important program, since it's a grant program, we just felt we couldn't fund as much for matching grants in 2025. Trinity Cathedral, at this point, the budget line item stays the same at 150. One significant change that looks like it's a major increase is for diocesan communication. But when I get back to the personnel side, you'll see that the total budget for communication-related expenses is actually going to be much less. But we did increase what we call the program budget for diocesan communication because we anticipate on using consultants and technical assistants on a as-needed basis, basically an hourly basis, to support some initiatives around the diocesan website and maintenance on some of our communication platforms. So the budget increased from the $24,200 to 40,000, so roughly about $16,000 increase. But most of that is going to go to providing payments for technical support as needed. Archival expenses the same. Going down to Episcopal Church women, last year the budget was 16,000. We reduced that to 750 this year. Many of their activities are virtual, so we think they will be able to cover their core activities on that budget of 750. They also get donations for some of their activities also. Reparations Commission requested a slight reduction in their budget from 43,850 to 34,650. The 34,650 though is probably in line with close to what the actual expenditures have been over the last few years and probably will be this year. And Commission on Black Ministry, no change in the budget there. Another area of change in program budget is for youth activities. Last year budgeted at 30,000. This year at 15,250. Much of that decrease is coming into place of grants, money allocated for grants at the convocation level. We reduced that down about $8,000-9,000 down, so that it's 15,250 is the total budget for youth activities. We feel that still sufficient to support the activities that are ongoing and planned. It is more in line with the actual expenditures in youth activities over the last couple of years, though. Next major area is congregational development, and those no changes in those areas. Congregational development and pastoral response, no changes in the budget for that. Congregational ministries, also, this is a group of about 6 or 7 ministries, and there have been no changes in the budget line item in that area. So that subcategory of congregational development stays the same for 2025 as it was in 2024. Ministry development, here we've seen some significant changes. Committee on Priesthood, the budget was $31,750. It's down to $10,000. A lot of that is due to a change in the way that program is actually executed. There's some significant savings on the way that the Committee on Priesthood has been restructured to support our candidates for priesthood, so that the budget of $10,000 is deemed sufficient by those working that particular program. So that's why the budget is $10,000 in 2025. Other programs in this area are pretty much the same, with decreases in the Fresh Start and Transition Ministry. Again, based on the way that the program is being administered now, we thought that the budgets of $1,000 for Fresh Start and $3,500 for Transition Ministries would be sufficient to support their activities. School of Ministry, a significant reduction in the cost, what was budgeted for 2024 versus 2025. That's largely to the restructuring of the School of Ministry. The program costs for the director of School of Ministry are now covered by the canon for vocations. Is that mainly because we changed the way we manage that school. So all of the most of the employee expenses or staff expenses are covered in a different area. And also there's been a significant change on the way their instruction program works. They partnered with the Diocese of Pennsylvania, and they saved on instructional costs in terms of instructors for the classes of School of Ministry. So the budget there, at the request of the committee for School of Ministry, has been reduced. Committee on the Deaconate and Deacons Council, slight reductions in their budgets, again, mainly due to requests from those particular organizations that requested a slightly smaller budget in 2025. Going in diocesan gatherings, diocesan convention, we reduced that budget from $20,000 to $10,000, mainly based on experience of running diocesan convention. We'll only have one convention in 2025, so that we don't need to budget for two, which we've had the last couple of years. And clergy conferences, slight decrease in that area. Lay conferences the same. Within the larger church, accruals for Lamouth and House of Lamouth Conference is the same. House of Bishop budget the same as 2024. In General Convention, we didn't have an accrual for General Convention in 2024. We budgeted $30,000 for the next General Convention, and we'll be looking at what the projected expenses are for that General Convention. There may be some changes in the total amount occurred over the next few years.
On November 3rd. Are you
Yes.
including that in something? And
I think that was a question. Going down to program and covenants, no big changes in the first two line. No changes in the first two line items. Ecumenism and Providence 2 covenant. Those are mainly fees we pay for participating in those activities. Companion diocese budget has been reduced from $9,500 to $5,000. Main contributors there are the ability to travel for our companion diocese has been restricted somewhat over the last year. Also, we felt an decrease was in line given to what the diocese can support to outreach to our companion diocese. So we've seen a reduce in that budget line item. And Episcopal Mental Health and Spiritual Health Ministry reduction from 1,000 to 500. 500 is closer to what their actual expenses are. They've changed the way that the program is being executed is going to be changing over the next several months. But with the $500 would allow them to continue to support some of the material they have on their website. any questions on one of those program costs or expenses in the budget before I move on to diocesan staff? Not seeing any. Going down to diocesan staff, the budget for the bishop. Well, first of all, for diocesan staff, I'll say in producing this budget, we did project a 2.5% cost of living increase across the board for staff who are working as of July of 2024. Those that were fully on staff, we did budget in a cost of living increase for those staff. In terms of the bishop's salary, and I'll talk a little bit about some changes that may be coming. We did go through with a 2.5% increase on the base salary from last year for salary and housing. There's some changes in the professional allowance and transportation budgets from 2024 to 2025. So that this budget shows a slight increase for the budgeted line items for Bishop's salary. But we did have a line 606, visiting bishops and Episcopal support. We were projecting potentially having a assistant bishop, and we projected a budget of $40,000 in there. But also, as we were putting this budget together and getting it finalized, we did receive notice that there's potential for an adjustment to the bishop's salary based on market adjustment based on actual payment levels for our past bishop and other bishops in neighboring dioceses or similar sized dioceses. So the standing committee has sent a letter to increase the compensation for the bishop for 2025. That $40,000 we had budgeted for potential assistant bishop will cover most of that projected increase in there, and our revised budget will show that projected increase in the bishop's salary for 2025. I know Bishop French, do you want to have anything to say now on that, or I could elaborate more if needed?
Thank you. I'd be grateful for a chance just to share a little bit around that. As many of you know, we have spent this year dealing with things we have discovered in the financial realities of the Diocese of New Jersey, beginning with our conversation in March at convention, where we talked about the fact that we had outstanding audits and other work we needed to do. One of the things we discovered a few weeks ago was that we've continued to find places where our budget has not been entirely indicative or representative of the monies we have actually been spending in a variety of areas. And one of the things we discovered several weeks ago was that the compensation listed for Bishop Stokes, which appears similar to the numbers that are listed for me at this time, was in fact not fully inclusive of all of his compensation. In addition to those numbers, he was provided with housing, and that was a benefit that was not extended to me, which created a substantial discrepancy between my compensation and his. But it also put me out of alignment with other bishop compensation. There is a report on that the Church Pension Fund issues every few years, and the 2023 report clearly indicated that I was substantially out of alignment with bishops of other dioceses of similar size and situation. And so that, plus a couple of other factors that were included in the conversation, including the fact that Bishop Stokes had declined a cost of living increase just a few months before I arrived, which had a much more substantial impact on my compensation than it did on his. The standing committee was gracious enough to receive that information and to review and to respond. We're still crunching numbers and finalizing points, but I would be happy to answer any questions. We want to be transparent about this. We want to have the budget reflect what is actually being spent in a variety of areas as well, and not to have it be that is covered in some places, but also parts not covered elsewhere. So I'd be happy to have a conversation with if anyone has any questions or anything you'd like me to speak to on that. It was the work of the standing committee. It was not, I can't give myself a raise. It's not, in fact, a raise. It's a right sizing of compensation, and it is something that I am very grateful for the Finance and Budget Committee's work and for the Finance Committee and for the Standing Committee, as well as the ways that this was so gracefully and compassionately received. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Not having any questions on that, then perhaps I'll hand the microphone back to you, Jonathan, and wait for the next opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank, Bishop French. Next staff salary item is in Canada for the Ordinary. Again, we projected a 2.5% increase over the base salary of last year, which was 105 for salary and housing. And this one also, we do have a line item that's been added, line 621. 6 was actually not a line item just because it's a budget item in there, that $20,000. Again, and looking at the compensation levels between our diocese and similar roles and neighboring diocese or diocese of similar size, there's a projection that we may need to make a market adjustment to industry standards on the salary for Canada of the Ordinary. So we budgeted in $20,000 in case to support that potential increase in that particular compensation for that position. As we revise the budget over the next few days, we'll actually put that up, determine if we need to increase the salary and housing for Canada of the Ordinary. But to give it somewhat a ballpark of what we'll be looking at, as I mentioned, we'll make changes, but we hopefully it won't change the bottom line too much. We're projecting that we may do a market adjustment of around $20,000 onto the Canada of the Ordinary salary, and then there'll be similar adjustments to any CECAs that's paid if it's a clergy person in that position. So we're projecting that the compensation line 21A may be closer to that 135,858 as we finalize. Like I said, that $20,000 may move up to line 620. Somewhere up to $20,000 may move up to that area. Other things we've done in terms of the Canada of the Ordinary, we pretty much slight change in continuing education budget to be again more in line with some other positions in there, but we've kept the professional allowance and transportation the same. So again, the bottom line, we're looking for a potential increase in compensation at level from 120 to 142, 358. The budget revisions will probably just move some dollars around within that, but we think that that final compensation number will be fairly close to what it is in our current budget. Going down, we don't have a chief operating officer position in 2025, so there's no budget for that. Going down to chief financial officer, as you've probably seen in Good News of Garden State or the monthly town halls, that Sarah Page has been promoted into that position. She's been doing that work, overseeing our finance team pretty much since March. So she's been officially promoted in that level. So we'll have a budget line item in 2025 for chief financial officer. Initially, this is paid at the same rate as Canada of the Ordinary. Again, we're looking at potential market adjustment by looking at salaries for similar dioceses within our region and similar size dioceses, projecting that we may need to make that same market adjustment that we're making to Canada of the Ordinary in terms of market level adjustment, we call it, to industry standards. The other budget line items in here, since it's a layperson, it's just the employer portion of the Social Security that we have in there for that role. We also added continuing education, professional allowance, and a small transportation budget for this position at a rate that's similar to other of the diocesan staff positions, that $1,500, $1,250, and $1,000. You'll see that carried through on several of the other diocesan staff positions. Transition Ministry Officer. Again, this is a role we had this year. It's a part-time role, and we plan to continue that into 2025. It wasn't on the budget last year, but we have been paying out in 2024 for Transition Ministry Officer. It's a part-time position. The salary at $33,825, and the benefit for continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation you see there, very similar to what many of the other positions at the diocesan staff level. Canon for congregations, we did budget it last year, but it's been a while actually filling that role. We actually have someone started that role last Tuesday for canon of congregations. The budget item for 2025 is $90,000, which is what we originally budgeted in 2024. It actually was covered under another area, but it's now called a canon for congregations. In this particular one, the person serving in that role is actually also serving as part-time priest at another congregation, and that congregation will contribute $25,000 towards the salary for the canon for congregations position, so that the full cost of the $90,000 is not borne by the diocese. The other things listed are the SECA, the continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation. Those are going to be covered out of our diocesan budget. So the total cost for canon for congregation is that $75,210. Canon for Hispanic ministry was budgeted at $100,000 last year and $100,000 this year. This is a position we spoke to when we presented the budget last year, both in November and in March, that because the other canon positions have been adjusted to $90,000 or $90,000 as their annual salary, so it was agreed that we wouldn't decrease the compensation for the canon for Hispanic ministry, but we wouldn't pass along any cost of living increases until the other positions caught up to that level, so that we're keeping the salary and housing level the same. We're also making some adjustments in continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation for this position to so that the budget for those line items are in line with other similar diocesan staff positions. Going down for the canon for formation and vocations. This relates back when I talked to School of Ministry. School of Ministry is now in the direction of the canon for formation and vocations, so that that's one of the reasons we don't need as large a budget in the School of Ministry, because we're not carrying the executive director's salary under that program budget. Again, this one, 2.5% increase in the salary item for cost of living increase. Education, professional allowance, and transportation have also been budgeted in line with other similar positions on diocesan staff. Commissioner for Lifelong Christian Formation. This is a part-time position, more like a quarter-time position in there. Continuing on from last year, slight increase of the 2.5% cost of living increase. And also we've allotted some funds, even though it's a part-time position, for continuing education and transportation. Commissioner for Youth and Young Adults, just a simple 2.5% cost of living increase, and a small amount allowed for continuing education. This is also a part-time position, and a travel allowance similar to other diocesan staff positions. Canon for Black Ministries, we have someone serving an interim role. This year we're planning to hire that new position in 2024. That hire probably will not take place until 2025, so we budget that at the $90,000, and also budgeted in continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation at the level for other positions. This next one, Missioner for Black Ministries, we plan on making an adjustment there, so that is budgeted in for 2025. It'll be a part-time position. Missioner for Black Ministries. We had budgeted that last year, but we didn't have anyone in that role because we never hired a new canon for Black Ministries. We continued the existing incumbent in that role for 2024. But we do plan on making an adjustment to allow for a part-time Missioner for Black Ministries, especially to help the transition when the new person comes on board. It's not my fault. This is when I talked about communication. Last year's budget, we had a missioner for evangelism and social media. That role ended early in 2024. We don't have any budgeted position for that in 2025. A lot of the work around communications being hired by other staff members on existing staff, but also some of that additional money that we're budgeting in Diocese Communication, we call the program budget, we'll be using to bring in consultants and other technical expertise as needed to support updates and maintenance or improvements on our Diocese Communication platforms, so that $82,000 that was budgeted last year, we won't have that expense in the 2025 budget. Similar, we were budgeting a part-time Mission for Communications Technology to do, again, support some of those technological upgrades and maintenance in our communications platform. We're not budgeting that money in the 2025 budget for that role, so that there's a savings of about $37,000 in that particular position for communications technology. The canon for congregational development and mission, that role has been changed for the activities under the duties under that role have been transferred to the canon for congregations that I spoke to you earlier about. So we won't have that position in the 2025 budget. This next staff position, again, Bishop French talked about transparency and on all of our rural expenditures in there, is the Missioner for Emerging Ministries. That currently is a role held by the Missioner for Haitian Ministries. We budgeted that in the 2025 budget, and it's going to be paid out of the operating budget. The role is slightly expanded in that area to cover more than just the Haitian ministries, but all emerging ministries throughout the diocese. So we have a position for that on staff. You can see where the salary and the other related expenses, continuation, professional allowance, and transportation are actually in there budgeted, similar to what they were in the some of the other staff positions. But this position, we had started carrying it in the operating budget in 2024. We're actually going to show it in our 2025 budget as an expense, a staff position under the bishop.
Thank you. If I could just speak quickly to that, the reason the numbers look lower there in terms of compensation is that this is the one position where housing is provided. Our missioner lives in a rectory that has been provided by the diocese and is funded by the diocese. As we try and sort out budget lines and such, we want to be transparent about that. We also want to figure out how we can indicate that more clearly in our budgets going forward, but that housing portion sits in some of our real estate expenses instead of in our staffing expenses, but that does explain the discrepancy in compensation.
Yes, thank you. Next level area, line 680, administrative staff. With all the changes I mentioned along the way, there's actually a decrease in the administrative staff budget from last year to this year. There's been some changes in staff and doing what duties and the number of staff. Also, some of that administrative staff costs have been moved into other areas, such as the chief financial officer now. That's covered under that line item versus being in administrative staff. We also project some decreases in expenditures because of some of the part-time financial support we brought on to help with the audits. We've had some of those on board in 2024, so we can catch up with our audits. As we catch up with our prior audits, we anticipate a reduction in the need for those part-time financial support staff in that particular area. So there's a decrease in administrative staff costs by about $75,000 in that area.
Thank you. If I could just, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
First, Henry Richards has asked, is the financial document that we're seeing available somewhere? The answer is not yet, because as discussed, some of the numbers are still in flux, and that still has to go to diocesan council and it has to be finalized. So when those numbers are fully available, the document will be posted and it will be shared, and you'll get information about how to access that on the convention page. However, because it is not yet, as you might imagine, moving convention from March to November means that we're doing this on a slightly different timeline, and we're trying to get you the accurate information. So stay tuned. It's not yet available, but it will be soon. The other question in the chat is about why would we decrease travel? And my answer to that is actually that we've tried to create more consistent benefits and expenses across staffing positions. So you'll notice that, for example, in the continuing education line, we had vastly different numbers ranging from nothing even for clergy to $5,000. That wasn't for me. It was for another member of the staff. Those numbers didn't make much sense. So we've tried to create more equitable and more appropriate numbers across the board. So around the area of continuing education, for example, we've put in the canonical number for most clergy positions, and we've put in a number for lay positions as well, so that there is some support there. It nets out to around the same, but it is much more equitable. Transportation is a similar situation, and we will deal with it as it goes by, as we go through the year, and make sure that people have enough transportation expense allowance to do what they need to do to ensure that they can carry out their work. But we're really trying to get things to a baseline so that we can assess and move from there. We want to make sure as well that we're reviewing expenses and reviewing mileage and similar, because that work hasn't always happened in the past. And so consider this more of a placeholder than a statement about mission or a commitment to support ministry. We are committed to support the ministries, and we support the mission work that is being done by the various staff members. I realize that's not a detailed answer, but I hope it clarifies why we are where we are with some of these lines.
Any other questions back in the chat? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and finish up on health insurance costs. Seeing a slight increase in that area. Some of that is due to us budgeting for the actual cost of health insurance for staff, especially incumbent staff. If they're on a family plan, we're budgeting for a family plan. If they're a single, then they're single budget. Some of the budgets in the past, it just across the board, just assume one level of premium for health insurance. It varies greatly whether it's just the individual or the individual and their family. So we've adjusted the budgets appropriately there in those areas. That's why we're projecting an increase in our health insurance cost. Plus, there have been some increase in premiums, and we're adjusting people on the plans as necessary. And the other areas in this area, pension and all those are calculated based on the actual salaries that are provided for those clergy and staff members. Overall, in this budget, we're projecting an actual decrease in the total diocesan staff budget from that $2,191,000 in 2024 to $2,071,000 in 2022. So over $100,000, about $120,000 decrease in the total budget for diocesan staff salaries. Diocesan staff costs, that's more than salaries. Diocesan staff costs. We'll be making a few more adjustments, but even with increases in a few areas, those market increases and some other adjustments, though, we're projecting that the the total costs for diocesan staff will be down somewhere near $100,000 from what it was in 2024. Going towards the final areas of the budget, insurance, bonding, and audit, those expenses will be the same as they were budgeted in 2024. The audit costs, or the costs paid to our independent auditors, we're doing ongoing with the audits now, projecting that we'll continue that on in 2025. But hopefully we've catched up on some past audits so they can start working on the most recent audits, and within a year or so we'll get back on a regular schedule of having the audit done a year after the fiscal year completes. We did project an increase in our legal budget cost for legal. We've been budgeting $5,000, but spending significant much more than that over the last few years, mainly because of Title IV actions that are ongoing. As some of those conclude, we hope to see some of the budget costs go down, but the Budget and Finance Committee did deem it necessary to project an increase in that particular budget. We're hoping that some of those extraordinary costs can be covered by the trustees' funds as opposed to being the operating budget, because we've seen some extraordinary cost in Title IV expenses, and in some of those cases that's to pay for the legal cost of some of the defendants in those Title IV activities. Next area of the budget is facilities, projecting a small decrease in the property maintenance cost, or significant decrease in the property maintenance cost from $20,000 to $12,500. No change in utilities. We are projecting an increase in our telephone costs. This mainly is due to changes in our telephone providers and the way we provide our telephone services. So we're seeing actual increase in cost in 2024, and we're projecting that in 2025. Other areas around there, many of those either the same or slightly less going into 2025 based on actual experience of what the expenditures might be. Slight decrease in our hospitality budget. This is largely due to our sexton, John Conti, providing a lot of services when we do need food, cost for food for diocesan events. He's been able to do that at significant savings than what we had been in the past by going to outside caterers. We do project an increase in our IT maintenance and support. We're at about $60,000 last year. Based on the experience this year, and those areas project some increase. A lot of that's due to some overlaps in our IT support providers with contracts. We're winding down a contract on our old IT support contractor and then ramping up support with the new one, and there's some overlap in the periods between those two contracts. Leased equipment budget is going to be decreased a little bit in 2025. And a big area of increase, though, is the computer software and supplies. A large part of this is subscription services we pay for a lot of our software, especially our accounting software. We did have an upgrade to that in the spring of this year to help us more accurately track and reflect our expenditures across the board. We found that and reviewing some of the prior financial transactions from the past, that we weren't getting accurate reporting out of our financial system that was being used, and it required some upgrades so we could get much more detailed reporting in terms of our financial systems and breakdown of line items. So that has cost us the increase in subscription costs for that particular software package. So that shows the increase of the budget line from 2024 to 2025. Other general obligations, retired clergy health and widows and orphan health insurance, budgeting those the same as 2024. And retired clergy fund and orphans fund, again, budgeting those the same as 2024. In the end, the total budget for expenditures we came up with was $3,901,076. And that explains why we have the budget line item for going back up to the top. Sorry for scrolling on you folks. This 419,204 is again the difference between the 3,901,75, which is our total expenditures, and the amount that we're projecting in our first three income lines. So we're projecting now a potential drawdown from our trustee grants of 419,204. That compares to a drawdown of 2024, which was 734,937. So we're projecting a decrease in the amount drawn down from the diocesan trust funds in 2025, and that's a significant decrease from where we were back in 2023 on diocesan trust funds. So that's the budget. A little brief synopsis of where we are in the budget. Like I said, that we will be probably within another 2 weeks posting a revised budget. We don't see a very significant change in that 3,901,75. It could go up, could go down. It depends on as we make these final adjustments. But we're hoping to keep it within those lines and keep that drawdown from the trustee grants in that range that we show here, or maybe a little bit less than that.
Thank you very much. My personal goal is to get that drawdown to be just under 400,000 if we can, and I think we might be able to do that. So we've got a few areas we're working on, a couple of lines to refine and strengthen, and but I'm delighted and grateful for the work that you, Jonathan, and the Finance and Budget Committee have done to present us with a budget that shows significant steps forward. I'm grateful to our congregations, our clergy, and our lay leaders who have really stepped up in response to our diocesan situation and have increased our marks of mission assessment revenue. And so I think we're in a pretty good place, all things considered. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, thank you for the presentation, and thank you all for being part of it. We're going to turn now to the legal part of our discussion this morning, and I'm going to ask our Chancellor, Canon Paul Ambos, to share. Chancellor, would you like to start with resolutions or with Constitution and Canons?
If I can, I'd like to start with Constitution and Canons because that's the longer one.
Thank you. Would you like me to share the document?
I can share, then I can present that myself.
I'm getting good at this, and I have already prearranged for you to have sharing capacity. So
thank you so much. Okay, so the report of the Standing Committee on Constitution and Canons is document number 3. It's on the diocesan website on the page for the documents for the 241st convention. And as is the case every 3 years or so, the Committee on Constitution and Canons is charged with looking at resolutions that were passed by the just passed General Convention to see if any of the changes in the church canons for the Episcopal Church require any conforming changes to our diocesan canons. And we found out that, yes, we did. From the 80th General Convention, there were changes in Title IV structure. This is clergy disciplinary proceedings with regard to the responsibilities and definitions for an intake officer and for investigators. And both of those things, we have provisions in our diocesan canons. So you can see that the resolution 2024 A053 and A054 made some changes, and particularly you'll note in for Canon 4.2, it says one or more persons can be an intake officer. In our diocesan canons, we have a provision for electing an intake officer, but only one. And there are some dioceses that have provisions for more than one. Sometimes it's useful to have a second, or possibly, I suppose, a third intake officer in case there's a conflict of interest with the one that the convention gets to elect. And so, scrolling down, this would require a change in our diocesan canon to accomplish that. And so what the committee is proposing is that we could still elect an intake officer, but also the bishop diocesan, with the advice and consent of the standing committee, can appoint one or more additional ones. In some dioceses, they find that having a male and a female intake officer is better for getting information from complainants and makes them more comfortable talking to somebody. So that's what the job of the intake officer is, and so we're making that recommendation. For investigators, currently we have a scheme where the bishop would appoint one investigator for a year. But as it turns out, we need different kinds of investigators for different matters. One of the changes that was made by the General Convention was that investigators could be hired by the church attorney, particularly if the church attorney is looking into going into a trial and needs to have more information than had previously been generated through the Title IV process. And so the recommendation here for Section 6 is to have the reference panel or the church attorney appoint one or more investigators to serve for the duration of a particular investigation rather than for a one-year term. And that really complies with the current practice, and it certainly makes it better and easier to see what's going on and not just have an investigator on tap, which for the most part was never investigated for many, many years, never appointed. So, and the committee recommends adoption of these changes. Our second change results from the change of our annual convention from March to November. Previously, we had a scheme in the constitution of the diocese that provided for the election of deputies and alternates to the General Convention. And the way it had been structured before is that after the year after, the convention after the meeting of the General Convention, we would elect deputies, and then the year after that, we would elect alternates. Because of the change now that our convention no longer immediately follows after the year after the General Convention meets, we need to sort of fix that, because otherwise we're getting delayed a year in making our elections. Another proposal that has been incorporated in this, which comes from Bishop French, is that rather than trying to elect deputies and alternates in an alternate year, we can elect them all at the same time. That way we have a more unified group of the deputation, and they can interact better with each other for preparation for General Convention, because there's a lot of information that needs to go into finding out how General Convention operates. If you haven't done it before, it's a big learning curve, and it's better to have other people that have already been there that can help you bring you up to speed. And so essentially what this would do, since constitutional amendments have to be passed by 2 consecutive diocesan conventions, what the proposal is that we have a first reading of these changes at this November convention, and that next November, which would have been under the existing provisions of the Constitution, the time when we would elect deputies, we can have the second reading and pass this, and then elect deputies and alternates next November. And so there's provisions for, to clean up things for filling vacancies and things like that. Dealing with the order of precedence, which makes a difference because the General Convention office wants to know who's the order of what the deputies are. And it's, we need to have an order for them because that's what the General Convention needs. And so again, order of precedence is based upon the date of their election or appointment if they're not all elected at the same time. And then within 60 days following their election, deputies and alternate deputies shall meet and elect from among the deputies a chair and a vice chair, which again are required by the General Convention office. And so we recommend the adoption of this implementing resolution. If we pass it at this convention, it won't go into effect until it's passed again at next November's convention, at which point we get to vote on it and a vote by orders, which everybody loves. By the way, if there's any questions about anything, you can raise them as I go along. I'm not necessarily following the chat, but somebody will bring them to my attention. Part 3 of the report, ballots in General Convention. You'll notice that we no longer use paper ballots and have not for a long time. And so therefore we have the phrase write-in votes are no longer appropriate because we're not writing on paper ballots. And so this is for dealing for nominations from the floor. You can do it electronically, and so you don't need to use the word write-in. So we're taking that out of the canon. Part 4 deals with Diocesan Youth Council. Because of the reorganization of the diocesan staff, we no longer have a director of youth ministry. Since the youth council is entitled to elect deputies to go to the diocesan convention, those have to be certified by somebody. And so the existing canon provided that the co-chairs of the youth council or the director of youth ministry can make that certification. And so in order to sort of relax the language, we're proposing just a member of diocesan staff with responsibility for youth ministry, regardless of what their title is, can certify the election of deputies to the Secretary of General of Diocesan Convention. And again, we recommend the implementation of this. Part 5, Mission Renewal Fund. For many years, there was a back and forth dealing with what to do with proceeds of sale of closed churches. And we eventually ended up with structuring a Mission Renewal Fund, which is funded from those sales and which is used for the diocesan council to approve grants for missional purposes of the diocese. Initially, it was argued that it should be only for new Hispanic ministries or supporting historically Black congregations, but it came out that it was adopted. It was for the missional purposes of the diocese as conceived by the diocesan council. One of the problems that I'm thinking we're all aware is the financial issues that we've had for the diocese. And so Bishop French has asked that the canon be amended to give some flexibility to the trustees of church property so that they can, depending upon what the needs of the diocese are, not necessarily all of the proceeds would go necessarily into the Mission Renewal Fund, but it would be a portion of them that could go in there. And that would be in conjunction with the advice of the diocesan council. And so this is implementing that in the canon. And so, the Mission Renewal Fund will still be in existence and it will still be funded by this proceeds of sale of closed churches. But in this case, it will be not necessarily all of it, but also be applied as per the other needs of the diocese in consultation with the diocesan council. And again, we recommend the adoption of this implementing resolution. Part 6 deals with the audit committee, and for every diocese needs to have an audit committee. The audit committee, Jonathan spoke earlier about their needs, and they're working on catching up. One of the problems is that the canon regarding the audit committee was not necessarily reflective of what their work was. And there was also some language that was in the beginning that was not quite clear as to exactly how it's constituted, because some members are elected by the convention and some are appointed by the bishop. And so then they have different kinds of terms. And so in consultation with the audit committee, we have come up with various amendments to their operating canon that will clarify how they get formed, will state more clearly what their job is for the diocese. They're basically working on auditing the diocese. If they have time, they can also work on congregational things, but they're not really working for congregations, which is what the existing canon talked about. And so if so directed by the which is the bishop, the audit committee will encourage and assist parishes and other congregational in their audit processes. And so again, and there was a miscitation to Episcopal Church canons, which is corrected here. And so again, we recommend the adoption of this resolution. It will bring the audit committee back into line with what their actual purposes and their actual practices are. Part 7, administrative assistance for the bishop. One of the things that was done, I think, probably around the time of Joe Dass's episcopacy, is that there was a position in the canons that certain members of diocesan staff would get 6 months compensation if there's a change in bishops. And since it has been in recent years, the tenure of all of these staff people is based upon their letters of agreement with the bishop. who is basically their boss. It was felt that we don't really need to have this in the canons anymore because it's covered by the letters of agreement. Again, there is a requirement for consultation with the standing committee for terminations of anybody on diocesan staff, for cause or for not. And so, again, this really moves this out of the canons and puts it into the letters of agreement, which can be individually for each of the members of the diocesan staff. Again, we recommend the adoption of this one. In the convocations of the diocese, which are the regional groupings of congregations, there is a dean who is sort of the executive officer for that convocation. And there was a question by Reverend Keith McCoy, who is a deacon, formerly archdeacon, who wants to know why deacons are excluded from being this position, either as the dean or the secretary of the convocation. And this really relates to the fact that, 60 or 80 years ago, when these canons were drafted, deacons did not have an active role in the life of the diocese the way they do now. And so in consultation with Bishop French, she says that a dean would have to be a priest because of their allowed canonical independence. But there's no reason why the deacons cannot serve on the nominating committee for choosing a dean. And so instead of the current would provide for 3 presbyters and 3 lay delegates, they could be 3 members of the clergy and 3 lay delegates to be on that committee. Part 9, Church Pension Fund. Currently, we have a committee for the Church Pension Fund, which largely just serves as communications, which are in practice these days carried out by diocesan staff. And so if that's the case, and there's no reason that that's going to be changing in the future, then these responsibilities can then be done by a diocesan staff person. And this is an amendment to the canon to state that and going forward. Part 10, we have in the Book of Common Prayer a provision that persons who are notorious sinners or otherwise can be excluded from receiving Holy Communion by their priest. And if they disagree with that particular form of discipline, they can make an appeal to the bishop. And the diocesan canons have already, for a long time, provided for a commission of inquiry to find out what the facts are, lay them before the bishop so that the bishop can make a determination as to whether that banning can be upheld or not. And again, Deacon McCoy had said, this talks, the canon talks about 1 presbyter and 2 other laypersons. And he says they should be able to be deacons who are not laypersons, but they are members of the clergy and they're not presbyters. So again, this is, as long as there's at least 1 priest on the commission, there's no reason why a deacon cannot also serve in place of a layperson. And again, we recommend that this be adopted. Canon 74, minimum compensation for clergy. A couple of minor things we're fixing, with like leaving out the word standing, putting that back in. But the primary change here is eliminating the provision in the canon saying that a congregation can supply a clergy person with an automobile. Since we already have a general provision for professional expenses, it doesn't have to have a special section of the canon talking about automobiles. And my understanding is that there are virtually no congregations who are buying cars for their clergy. So again, this is something that can be dealt with the general professional expense item on their compensation. Another thing being addressed in this change is that there are some, particularly part-time clergy, who are receiving housing in lieu of full mandated set cash salary. And this is just providing that this is something that needs to be approved by the bishop and reviewed annually to make sure that it's fair to the member of the clergy and to the congregation involved. And another little minor change, we got rid of the term allowance, housing allowance, so that's fixing that as well. And that's basically it for Constitution and Canons. We have 2 members who are up for re-election. Other than that, we have been, I think, a very successful year in going through various proposals and proposing them to the diocese. Any questions on Constitution and canons at this point? Hearing none.
Chancellor Ambrose, I have one question.
Oh,
This
yes.
is Paul Shove Kozak from Cristo Rey Trenton. Regarding the resolution about how to use funds from sold church properties, I'm wondering if the committee ever considered giving more specific wording to the resolution as opposed to saying it could be the committee has the freedom to decide what to do with the money, giving some to the Mission Renewal Fund or some for other purposes with the diocese, if they actually considered a specific percentage, you know, say for the sake of argument, 50%.
That's not something that was really proposed. And again, because of the variable needs of the diocese and of the diocesan council's perception of the needs for the Mission Renewal Fund, rather than putting in a fixed percentage, was felt to have this done by a majority vote of the trustees, and they can be in touch with diocesan council as far as diocesan needs is concerned. Other than that, it's something that you know, if you have a percentage, you may want to, every year somebody wants to change the percentage one way or the other, and we feel that flexibility is a better idea in this particular context.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Chancellor, for the thorough and helpful presentation of the canonical changes proposed. I agree that flexibility was the goal of that particular resolution, and therefore not putting not pinning down a number at this point is helpful, but it can also be revisited in future years should we find that there is a need for a more clarity of a process that can follow through from year to year. I appreciate the work that everyone did on this. I recognize we're still doing a lot of kind of catching up and cleanup. I think probably we will always be doing that with Constitution and canons. It's just the nature of the beast. But I know that there's been a lot of really faithful and careful work, and it shows in this report. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Committee on Resolutions. Assuming no further questions on Constitution and canons. So the Committee on Resolutions, for those who are not familiar with it, is established under the rules of order for the convention. And that is a committee that is entirely appointed, and their job is to receive proposed resolutions that don't come from some other diocesan body under the canons, and edits them as to form, presents them to the convention for consideration after we have a hearing, which people can show up and talk to the proposers of these proposed resolutions in order to get possible clarity or changing the direction of any of them or otherwise, and have the proposers have an opportunity to amend their original proposal if they wish. And at the end of that hearing, the committee meets and makes a recommendation for or against, or to make no recommendation for each of the proposals. And so we have a preliminary report, which has the resolutions as received and as formatted in a standard form. After the hearing, there will be a final report, which will include any changes which are made by the proposers and any recommendations made by the Committee on Resolutions. I will say that if the committee recommends for or against anything, typically those resolutions will go into the consent calendar to be voted on rather than spending time if there are non-controversial changes. And finally, if there is any resolution that was not submitted by the deadline of, I think it was September 30th, change from the March convention. And those can be brought to the floor of convention for consideration on a 2/3 vote. So this year we have two proposal resolutions. One deals with sales of real estate of continuing mission congregations. Recall the Constitution canons dealt with proceeds of sale of closed parishes and missions. And these are typically owned by the trustees of church property. And so typically when a continuing congregation wants to sell off, for example, a rectory that's no longer being used, they have to make an application to the Bishop and Standing Committee for their consent to that transfer, which is required by Episcopal Church canons, required by diocesan canons, required by a New Jersey state law. And part of the procedure for making that application, the congregation should, although it hasn't always, give an explanation of what they plan on doing with the proceeds of sale. It may be that they're buying another building. It may be that they are investing in a new program, or it could be that it's just for support of the mission, but on an ongoing basis. And so if a building is sold and the trustees own it, and so they're the ones that are selling it, but they're holding it in trust for the congregation. And so if the real estate is subject to an express trust, somebody gave it to their parish with a stipulation that if it's sold, then it goes to support my grandchildren or something like that. Well, if that's the condition for the property, then the trustees have to honor that. And so the resolution recognizes that. If there's a plan for the proceeds that were made in application, then that plan should be followed. If the congregation has not submitted a plan, then the trustees should, in their discretion, disperse the proceeds in a way that, in their judgment, best support the congregation in their efforts to discharge their common call and mission that we established in Canon 47 about 3 or 4 years ago. And so this is just a resolution authorizing them to use their discretion in these cases. And there's an explanation in support, which gives you the text of Canon 47. And I think that's resolution. Oh, also, we've changed the resolution numbering system. We used to have, the 2024-1, which we had in March. And since we have 2 conventions in 2024, we're instead replacing the number with the number of the convention. So this will be the 241st annual convention, and so it's resolution 241-1 and -2. 241-2 is a recommendation received from Angela Cipolla, urging congregations who are under state law because they're religious entities are not required to pay unemployment compensation and temporary disability benefits for their employees, to urge them to opt in to do that. That way that employees, if they are separated from employment, they would be eligible for unemployment insurance. If the congregation hasn't paid into that fund, then the employee does not get that benefit. And since this is a matter of stewardship for our employees, opting in is a useful thing to do, and she's recommending that be done. It's not a requirement if this is passed, but it's a recommendation to parishes. Any questions on these proposals? And again, if anybody has any questions, if they think that their clarification could be used for any of them, there will be hearings on November 2nd in the small conference room, and that will be in person, and also you can register to join by Zoom. There's a link at the top of the report for the registration page, and it will be at 10 o'clock on Saturday the 2nd. I expect that the meeting will not be much more than half an hour to an hour. I don't think there's a lot of controversy. We only have 2 resolution proposals this year so far. If we do receive any late resolutions before the final report is prepared, we can throw that in there. But again, they can have to be a 2/3 vote for consideration by the convention. Any further questions on resolutions?
Thank you, Chancellor. I think we've overwhelmed everyone with the wonderful depth of information and opportunities to participate in our process here. So I appreciate the very thorough reports and the budget report as well. It looks like Canon Steve Connor has a question. Go ahead.
Sorry, just a mistake.
No worries. Thank you for being here. Seeing no further questions on any of these matters, I think we are concluding our business. We're a few moments before the scheduled end time. And I do appreciate your presence here today. A question, will the tinyurl.com be distributed? I'm not certain which tinyurl.com.
I know what it is. Okay,
Okay.
this is the link for registering for the Zoom meeting for the hearing on resolutions. It appears in the document of the copy of the report, which is again on the documents page for the convention. And if you click on that through the PDF file, it will bring you to the registration page.
Excellent. Thank you. I think that should also appear fairly regularly in our emails going forward from this point. So you should be able to find it in a variety of different ways. If you don't find it, please let us know and we will certainly send it to you separately. Not seeing any further questions, then the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you great thanks for the many resources and opportunities you have bestowed upon us here in the Diocese of New Jersey. We thank you for this time together, for the opportunity to reflect upon how we are planning for next year in terms of both budget and legal processes. And we pray your ongoing presence with us as we continue to prepare for convention next month. Bless us as we go from this meeting in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, thank you all. Go in peace, and we will see you again, if not at convention, if not sooner. Blessings.